and a lot of it in New York we had to steal. You
What-
can't shoot on the Brooklyn Bridge. We shot on the Brooklyn Bridge. The camera had to be handheld, and we even handheld lights so that we could light it.
Yeah.
And we had to really move quickly.
So last time we saw your first horror film.
That's right.
This time it's
By the way, I forgot to mention, I wanted to say one thing about the horror genre. There is another movie that I've been working on, which is a ghost movie, horror movie called, it's a pretty interesting movie. It's called The Remains. And Matthew Gratzner, who we've had here, is going to actually direct it. And he worked on it. And it is a really interesting ghost story. So it's not the old, I remember saying something about not doing, I hadn't been doing anything else like that, but this is also a pretty interesting movie. It's a battered woman syndrome type story, but it's a good story, ghost story.
I mean, the other one that you were involved with, The Others.
Oh yeah,
is
that's
also
true too.
That's also a really good story. I mean, the concept there is really cool. The idea of ghosts and you living in the same house, but one not knowing if the others, or one kind of isn't it like the other one's the intruder to the.
Well, no, the others is it's
Forget
a different.
if that's
It's like a time.
It's like there's a period kind of element to it. The ghosts are from like the Victorian area or something, and then the modern family's there,
and they're inhabiting the same space in different times, and it's a fascinating piece.
It's been a long time since I've seen it, but the thing that I believe I liked about it was that it's kind of like, I don't know if you know, The Thin Red Line was a war movie about, but the differentiator there was that it was kind of told a little bit from the other side too, like, and I believe that's the movie I'm thinking about. But this one also kind of feels like you're a little bit more in the ghost shoes as well. Yeah. It's not just somebody being scared out of the house. It's
it's a funny thing because this movie that we obviously we haven't made it yet, but this movie, The Remains, is really about it's a ghost story about a woman who goes to heal from trauma in a house that is haunted, and the history of the house has an effect on her present life. So it's a cool movie.
We'll be looking forward to do the podcast on that. We should also maybe do one about The Others or something at some point. But right now, so we saw your first horror.
Right.
Now, I just watched your first porno. No, I'm kidding. No.
You haven't seen my porno yet. No, I don't think so.
It's a really great movie, and I would say though that it probably has the most skin in it. That out of all the films that you
you're talking about Paraiso Travel.
Yeah, great film actually. So,
I'm glad you enjoyed it. It's good.
At this point,
again, another movie that you would never have seen.
Never would I ever say, "Hey,
I found it."
Yeah, let's do that. But I kind of sort of expected to watch it and say, "Okay, well, I'm not judging this for my taste. I'm not even judging it at all. I'm going to enjoy it for just the fact that it's a good movie that a friend made, whether it's my taste or not." Like kind of how you go see a romantic comedy with your wife, you know?
Sure, sure.
So, but I got to say, it's a completely different film that I'm going to mention now that you have nothing to do with, but it kind of had a similar effect on me. And this is something that I think people don't put enough effort into. And I can see that the director, yourself, they put a lot of effort into this. The movie, I forget what it's called. It's a movie with Ray Liotta. It's not Bad Lieutenant. It might be. But there's this movie, 16 millimeter, I think it was shot. And it's just got this insane opening scene where it's just a chase through town. And it's Ray chasing this person, and then there's like a pregnant woman bleeding out of her leg, but everything's kind of just like you watch the opening scene and you're like, okay, what is this? I'm going to stick around. This has a really interesting opening scene. It really, there's a whole set built to communicate just the vibe of where these people were living, going Scorsese style from room to
room, yes. And you saw
different things happening in different rooms, and this not even projects. It's less than that. It's like
it is kind of like almost like a hostel. It's a place where immigrants are spending their time while they're trying to integrate, and they're all illegal, and they're all in this one area. They've been, it's the cheapest place they can be in, and they have these. I mean, it's almost like a a storage facility that has little
that
rooms,
has little cubicles in it.
Cubicles, and you buy a room and you
just
live
enough
there.
room for a bed,
just enough room to live. But that's just where you are, and they're in New York.
And it says so much in that opening scene. All the different personalities of the people. There's, really messy. She's trying to start a business. He's got his computer. The old guy's got his nice little TV and everything neat.
You watch
there's two guys screwing. Then there's a guy jerking off to the people screwing in the other room. And then, it just is a really cool opening scene, which immediately made me think, okay, well, this is a good, it's going to be good storytelling.
Simone, who is the director, Simon Brand. I mean, Simone Brand. And he's Colombian. Interesting guy because I met Simone. He knew my cousins in Colombia. He's a Jewish Colombian guy, director, and very, very interesting guy. And I met the producers here who were looking to make this movie, and they didn't know how to do it. They came to me, and I kind of helped them find a way to put it together. We raised the money. They raised the bulk of it. I raised some of it. And, it was a really interesting group of people, and they were all Colombian. And I really enjoyed the story. I had read.
They had the script when they came.
Well, they had the script, and the script came from a book that was written by a very well-known Colombian writer. The writer.
Same name?
Yes,
Same
Paraiso
title?
Travel.
Yeah.
Paraiso Travel. No, the book was highly recommended in the New York Times. It was a very, very good, and he's a solid writer, major writer in Colombia. After only somebody like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, he's like the next generation of really, really interesting Colombian writers. And he's very, very talented guy. He's written a number of other books. He wrote another book that was made into a movie called Rosario Tijeras, which was in Spanish earlier. But this was a piece that was going to be made. We decided it had to be made in Spanish because the idea of the story was that these people couldn't speak English. That's part of the story. So
that's a huge part of it. It has to be.
You
that
couldn't
way,
have made it in English. So
no, it would have been so easy for them otherwise.
Yeah, everything would have
been like, oh, hey, where's 6th Street and Broadway?
And the idea of a guy getting lost at the beginning, and then you go back and you get to see how he got there, what happened.
I wanted to punch holes into it because I often do that just naturally. I'm not going to go ahead and say that it was, absolutely airtight, but really everything could be very easily explained the way that he behaved. Because sometimes a movie fails to grab me when the protagonist is an idiot.
Oh, okay.
And when you said that, he gets lost in New York and can't find his way back because he doesn't speak English, I felt like, well, then find a Spanish-speaking guy and find your way back, But they really, you did a good job, or the director, writer, whoever did a good job at kind of also always explaining and layering those elements. Like how he got here. He was told, don't talk to anybody in uniform. They're all against you. Don't, and then he lives in this kind of shitty, weird hostel. And this guy's like, well, there's like 1,000 of these in New York, and he doesn't know streets and stuff the way they're laid out. So
all true. And it works. Yeah. I mean, the setup was done, it's that way in the book too.
Yeah.
But, I have to say, Simone created that whole idea of that one shot, which is really we made that the title sequence, because it is, all of the titles were over that sequence. And that sequence was meant to set you up in that world. And
I love efficiency. That's very efficient, right? Yeah. So instead of boring people with a bunch of random images and titles so that everybody can sit through the opening credits, you're setting the movie up.
Yeah.
And then you can get into the story.
We really did set up the movie in that. And right after that, he's had a fight with his girlfriend. He goes outside. You saw what happens. He sees a police officer.
He just litters.
And the cop is coming to him, and he's been told that he's illegal, and he actually if ever this kind of story was more current than now, I can't
It's
imagine
very
what it would be, because right now I think illegal aliens are going to have a tough time, and they're going to be rounded up, and he doesn't want to be rounded up, so he runs. And the cop thinks, well, maybe he had something. He was doing something else, so the cop goes after him.
And all he was doing is he threw a cigarette on the ground and this guy, hey, you're littering, and he doesn't know what that means, so he runs off. I think another thing I liked about it was that it's very easy to make a movie about like what am I trying to say? Like if the filmmaker's trying to preach some ideology to somebody. I don't think it did that. This is like a case where you want to open the people's eyes. Presumably the director might have chosen that story to adapt because he might have some relationships to people, or maybe in his own family that went through something like that, right? So you don't just want to be like, this is what immigrants are going through and the world has to know. No. It's still a good arc. Yeah. It's actually about a guy who's in love as a teenager, late teenager, with this girl that he's just completely blinded by, who drags him into this shitstorm.
Exactly.
And then gets lost in New York and tries for months and months and months to find her as he's falling in love, or some other girl who's actually good for him starts introducing him to real American culture and teaching him how to be a bit of a man and stuff just by being a real woman. And then he goes and chases her, and there's this whole conflict. And that's what the movie's about. Yeah. But it's set in the context of an illegal immigrant being brought into the situation like
totally
this.
Right. I mean, I think, it's funny because I don't know if you ever saw the movie El Norte. El Norte was a movie that you should see just to compare, because El Norte was a very popular movie, and it was about a bunch of immigrants who had come from Guatemala through Mexico into the U.S. and but it was really lower class. Maids and field hands. I mean, it was at a much lower level. These people were kind of middle class in their own, or lower middle class, but they were not
okay. It even says it, like
they had a decent life in the country that they came from, and he could have stayed there and taken over his father's cab business. He had a real business to go. It was just that he was led around by his,
by his little member,
his little brain, which made him want to go with her. And she had another plan in mind. He didn't know that she just wanted to get out, and of course, at the end of the story, and I don't want to give it away, but the whole idea is he realizes that she was not really for him anyway. That was the whole. But
he even knows it. But he
knows it, but he can't.
You're kind of like, okay, dude, But at the same time, you also think, I want the closure too. Yeah. Like I'd at least want to go talk to her and see why she wasn't looking for me.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So if nothing else there. Exactly. And I also like how it actually, spoiler alert. I mean, not spoiler really, but how it ends, and that it kind of leaves it a bit open as to whether or not the real relationship is going to happen or not. Because when he leaves, she does say, if you go, don't come back. Yeah. Right. But I think, I think there's a chance.
Well, I think that's every viewer has their own opinion about what might happen, but at least we intentionally left it open-ended, because it is open-ended. Life is open-ended. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how things are going to change, how your relationships will be enhanced or broken by events that happen.
The decisions you make are going to affect things down the line.
But I mean, one of the things about it too was that the movie shows the trip that they think is going to be a first class trip to America, and it isn't anything. It's anything but.
So that's the part that and this is a really solid case study for people who want to get into making films that have a cause-driven film, essentially, because you could say that this is really. I mean, it really opens your eyes to the process, and I believe it to be very accurate based on things that I've seen, and. A lot of these people are duped. Yeah. They're being taken advantage of. They're being robbed all along the way. Yep. They're dying along the way, suffocating, getting shot by cartel and all that. Like, it's happening for real. And then, I'm not saying feel one way or another about it. You're still immigrating illegally into another country, so there are going to be consequences for that, of course. But I do feel like it's important. I mean, not as a human, you should empathize a little bit, but I think it just does a good job at not trying to convince anybody of what they should be thinking. It's just it's almost like documenting through a narrative storytelling.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why I liked it, because it wasn't preaching.
Yeah.
It wasn't intending to preach. It was telling one person's story, but through the story, you got to see what that life is like. And I mean, there's a moment in the story which I particularly like, where when they finally arrive in the States, they're in that lumber truck, and they're in logs actually, and they get out of the logs, and obviously one of them has died in the transit, and everybody is, kind of upset with the fact that this guy has died, and everybody is surrounding that man and the woman who's his wife or mother, whatever it is, and the family, and they're crying, and everybody has a feeling for those people, except for the woman, his girlfriend, who you can see the smile on her face. Like, she's made it.
What does it matter?
The hardest part is behind her, and she doesn't give a crap about what happened to anybody else.
Not first indication, but first clear hint where you're like,
whoa, who is
I think he even kind of noticed there,
whoa, she has no, she doesn't, she has no reaction whatsoever to the pain of other people. Yeah. She's only interested in her own gratification, really. And that's what happens at that moment. So that was a really strong moment.
Yeah, the characters are well
She's very
defined,
good, and the acting was really terrific. She's very good, and they all are. I mean, they were all really good. She, by the way, has done a number of things, and she's a well-regarded Colombian actress. Ana de la Reguera, who plays the other love interest.
Her I've seen in some
You've
stuff.
seen her in a lot of things. Yeah. She's Mexican, but she lives here now, and she's been in many. She's been in series. She's very highly regarded in Mexico, but she's also pretty well regarded here.
Yeah, there wasn't any bad acting in there, and I mean, except for except you'll be surprised at what I say here, because I don't even know if you know this. There is the original version on the DVD. But there's the dubbed version. Oh. And I watched the dubbed version.
Really?
I watched the Spanish version to get a gauge for the acting. I watched about a half hour and stuff. But then I thought, I do kind of want to see the film.
Okay.
Yes. So I think I get the point. It's good, right? Yeah. I watched the dubbed version, and it's good.
Yeah.
But the male voice actor, if you're listening, sir, please don't do any more dubbing movies.
Oh, really?
It's just I think it's tough too. Yeah. And I've never and the other reason I did it was because I've never actually seen a dubbed to English film. I grew up in Europe partially, so I watched a lot of American movies dubbed to German just because that's what they were like on TV. But I've never seen it the other way around. So in English, right? And I guess it's a Spanish to English, but I've never seen an English dubbed movie.
Okay,
but it worked. I mean,
Well, I'll tell you. I mean, it's an interesting fact, because when this was done. This is back in 2008, 9, whatever it was. Then now there is a place where AI, we've been talking about that, is going to make an extraordinary difference, because you can actually take the real voice of the individual and literally turn it into English, where it's seamless, and the lip syncing will be seamless.
That's the thing.
That's the extraordinary thing that's going to happen in the future. Yeah. And you could take that same film, redub it in English, and you would never know that it wasn't made in English.
Yeah. We're
at that stage now.
We really are, and I think the lip syncing is still being refined, but the voice stuff is really starting to sound good.
Yeah,
and one thing I learned when I came here too, where I always kind of knew a little bit more than my friends in Europe and stuff in other places I lived, was that I always knew what the American actors actually sounded like. And so that's, I think, sometimes the shock when people in other countries watch Brad Pitt, and then they meet Brad Pitt at a red carpet or something. It's like,
he doesn't sound anything like the Brad Pitt that they know. Well, the interesting thing is, I'll tell you this, in Italy, there's an actor who dubs all of Al Pacino's movies, and he's the same guy who dubs all of De Niro's movie.
So
Same voice.
Multiple, they
and,
sound
I mean, they're
the same.
not in the same movie generally.
Yeah, but they're like, they're two Italian kind of
guys,
gangster types. You do those.
He does all of those, and he does, so that you hear the Italian audiences that are listening to dubbed films, they're going to hear the same voice for certain actors all the time because that's who does them. They have once they become famous,
right?
Once they become famous, I mean, once the American actor is famous,
they have to stay consistent.
They stay consistent.
Yeah, you can't go use a different voice on every movie. Yeah,
so they have the same guy dub them, and it's really interesting because again, all of that we're right at the border of change. That's all going to change with AI because the whole dubbing system. You'll be able to watch a movie and hear it in its actual language, as we've said. I mean, I've seen these dubbing tests where you see a guy speaking in English, and then you go back and they have him talking in French, same thing that he's saying, and then the same thing in Spanish, and it's absolutely, you can't tell that he isn't speaking in that language, and it's perfectly lip synced and everything. I mean, it's extraordinary.
I mean, the whole voiceover industry is kind of going to go away because I mean, and I understand the unions are going to fight for it, and we have fair, not fair. The bottom line is, it's so easy now, and you can get the exact voice that you want right away, whether it's somebody's famous that you're trying to replicate, or if it's just like, I need a little more rasp, or I need a little, just tell the AI and it does it for you.
Yeah.
So
no, that's pretty fascinating. But in any event, I've never watched this movie in a dubbed version of it. I've only seen it in its original language. I know what the real actors sounded like. They didn't all speak English. Some of them, some of them did. I mean,
no, and that's why I wanted to watch a good, 20, 30 minutes as it was shot, because I did want to get a gauge for their tonality and everything before I just let some other person be them.
Again, I really like this film. This is one of those movies where I didn't just do this as a job. I did it because I really liked the story. I liked the book. And I thought that the writer was, I'd met the novelist, and the novelist, and I can't for the moment think of his name, but he's a great novelist, and he's written a lot of very good books, and I've read two or three of his books. They're all his books are all translated into English. He's a very he's a fairly popular writer, and he certainly is very popular in Latin America. Yeah. And one of the producers wrote the script with him. I mean, basically, one of the
that's cool.
Yeah, so that
so it stayed kind of true to the original vision.
Yeah, and it was very close to the real
now,
story.
Did the author base this on any real stuff, or is it all?
No. It's a made up story. Just he's a wonderful storyteller.
So what's the Paraiso thing? What
Paraiso Travel is just Paraiso means paradise.
Oh,
then Paradise Travel is just the agency that is setting up the, people go to the travel agency to get an opportunity to be brought from
they
country.
pay them money, they get them passports,
they pay them money, and they get them through, and they give them papers.
And I got that part that it was the name of the.
And that's pretty much what it was.
I didn't know what Paraiso meant.
No, Paraiso means paradise in Spanish. And it's Paraiso.
Well, that's
Travel,
a good, contradiction.
Going to paradise,
kind of
thing, it certainly is anything but. Paraiso is like a high end name for a company, Paradise Travel. It's the Paradise Travel Agency. That's what it is.
It is kind of the perfect name for the movie. Yeah,
and they get on this, and she keeps saying it's going to, first class. It's a first class trip. You get, and you realize it's anything but everything they have to do.
Yeah, and they use some.
They fly they have to fly across the Darien Strait into Panama, and then they have to go on.
They use some kind of a term, and then the guy's like, "What does that mean?" And it's like by river.
By river. Yes.
It's like, oh, okay.
You're gonna go on.
Getting a
boats.
little suspicious.
Yeah,
no, we're going to be crossing the river with a rope.
Yes.
This and then how did John Leguizamo get into this whole thing?
Well, John Leguizamo was in a movie. He was actually making a movie in Cartagena. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who's a very famous, you may not know him, but he did 100 Years of Solitude, which is the biggest novel ever written in Colombia, and many other novels too. But there was a movie being made in Cartagena of one of his books, and John was in it. And the director met Leguizamo, told him about the film. Leguizamo is Colombian.
Okay. So
And I mean, initially he's Colombian,
yeah.
and he said, "I'd like to do it."
He said, "Yes, I'd like to be a perverted, stuttering, crazy guy living in a squatting."
Well, here's the thing. I mean, it's interesting because he was born in Colombia. He lives in New York. He does a lot of stuff related to his Latin origin, but because he's lived in the U.S. for so long, he doesn't. I mean, his Spanish is fine, but in English, he's known as he's very improvisatory. He knows how to improvise, and he likes to improvise comedically. Yeah. That's who he is, The difficult part for him in this movie was that the movie was in Spanish, and he wasn't used to improvising. He had to kind of be very careful about getting himself into the character of this guy that he was playing. Oddly enough, I mean, it was more difficult for him to improvise in his native language than it was in English, But
was
but
the stutter
great.
Like his thing?
No, that was all his thing. I mean, he created that character.
Really?
Yeah, he created the character.
And the weird BDSM stuff was that
all of the stuff about that character was pretty much him in concert with the director sat down and kind of said, "Look, I want to make this a special guy. Let me bring something to it." And none of that was. I mean, that's not in the book. The book doesn't have a character.
That's interesting.
Quite like. I mean, he's a character, but he's not.
So was that
character.
a little bit of a tip of the hat? Like, look, I know it's a small movie and it's not a lead role, but do with it what you want, kind of thing.
No. I think it was just because Simone knew that John was a very creative actor, and he thought he could get a more interesting character out of him. And he got this.
If I didn't know before,
guy who's in the room, and everything about him was stuff that John had a lot to do. But they worked together.
Little dog in the bag and everything.
Yeah, they worked together on building who that character was, and John brought in a lot of little touches to make him the eccentric, kind of odd character he became, and a lovable character too.
Yeah, he really worked.
You wind up, he cares for this guy.
He's a breath of fresh air. Like what for this guy, right? He goes through all these things, and initially
he's wondering what the guy is gonna do. What is
the way they're introduced?
Take him.
Some hooker comes out with a strap on, and it's like, now you're putting me in a room with this guy. Like, what next? But then he says, he's good for the money. Don't worry about it. And then he can't pay, and he just wants to take weird pictures of him and stuff. But he's not a criminal in a hurting way. Like he's surviving.
No, I love the character. I love the character he played. Now, one of the interesting things about the movie is most of the movie takes place in New York, in Queens, in New York. That section of New York. But we shot all of that in Colombia. Only the exteriors and the restaurant were shot in New York. All of the interior of his apartment and all of that stuff was shot in Colombia.
Was it a financing tax incentive thing through Colombian film?
No, it was just easier to do. I mean, we did the bulk of the movie we shot in Colombia. All of the travel that took place between Colombia and America.
Well, sure, all those flashbacks.
All of that was all done in Colombia, in different sections of Colombia.
That makes sense.
Nearby.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Not too far out of Bogota, but it was really, I thought, it was well done and planned. I mean, we planned everything out. Simone is a really careful, very well, music too. The music was was all planned. The music that was in the film. And at the end, their credits, the end credits of the movie were all done by a group in New York that took pieces of the movie and were able to animate it and turn it into something really. I love the way that was done. Yeah,
that's really cool. I didn't even.
It was a very inexpensive movie. I mean, it was done for, by American standards,
So what was it?
It was about $3 million, but it was, it was.
Yeah, for international.
For a Colombian movie, it was expensive, but for an American movie, certainly not. But it's very well made. And and the cameraman came from Spain. The production designer came from Mexico. The rest of the crew came from Colombia. We came to New York at the end of the movie to shoot the scenes in New York City.
Did you shoot the U.S. stuff with the U.S. crew, or did you bring everybody out?
No, we didn't bring everybody, but we did bring, I mean, the designer, the cameraman were the same ones, but we brought additional people locally, and I knew people in New York. They didn't know anybody, but I knew people in New York, so I hired all of the New York crew with a good friend of mine who was our line producer in New York, Chris Bonjour, and he was really wonderful. And he basically helped put the New York section together. And a lot of it in New York, we had to steal. And in the sense
I was going to ask that, because
you can't shoot on the Brooklyn Bridge. We shot on the Brooklyn Bridge. You can't put a camera. You're not allowed to put if a camera's on a tripod, or you can't
permits
shoot.
And cops and
so we had to have the camera had to be handheld, and we even handheld lights so that we could light it. And we had to really move quickly. I mean, it was very focused.
Question there then too, because this actually brings up, there's another movie we spoke about in a previous episode. With Tom Cruise, where you shot down Times Square, right?
Here we shot in Times Square with no lights and just a camera and a guy. And the interesting thing was, when he arrived, there's another scene that was written differently, where he sees a girl on the street that he thinks is
gets
her.
out of the bus, right?
Yes. Well, that was originally on a subway train, and he's in a subway, and there's a subway going the other way, and he sees her on the other train, and he jumps off the subway car and tries to run to find a way to get to the It was complicated, and we realized we're never going to get permits to shoot it on a real subway the way we want to shoot it. It's going to be complicated and extraordinarily expensive.
Yeah.
So the idea of turning it into putting him on a bus was a way to be able to save money and still get the same idea.
I almost like that a little bit more, because it allows him to stop, and you think, he might actually catch her. If it's a subway, you're thinking,
he's never going to get her. Yeah.
But here he's got a chance. He still blows it with the other one.
He still blows it, yeah.
But so what about, the people in Times Square then? Were those actual just people walking around?
Those were just people walking around.
Really?
That was all, whatever existed was there. We shot, and it was like a student film. Nobody knew what we were doing.
When it comes
we didn't have
stuff like that. So what
we shot it.
I know that distribution for it.
You're not really focusing on any of them.
Right.
So it wasn't a bit. Look, the thing
documentary standards apply.
You kind of. Basically, you put up a sign behind the camera saying, if you happen to, if you don't want to be seen in a movie, don't walk around this, don't walk the other way. If you don't care, just, but once it basically tells them that if they don't want to be in it, they don't have to be in it. But if they don't care, they're,
may or may not.
We may, so that they're not. It doesn't necessarily protect you against a lawsuit if somebody wanted to come after you, but generally it does.
My question is, that's one thing, because this comes up a lot with indie films. Because it's like, we need this shot in Times Square, and
how are we going to do this?
We don't have Tom Cruise budgets. And
we didn't fill even that scene.
Well, you didn't fill it, but at least you had you got the permits. You were able to shoot there and all that. So was this completely guerrilla, or did you get Pole City permits to shoot there?
No. It was completely guerrilla.
So if that's the case, then when the film gets done, delivered, and it goes through E&O, nobody's talking about this?
They do, but basically E&O, those who don't know, is errors and omissions insurance, which you have to get on every movie, because there are times you're going to get sued for things that, and the standard is usually who is injured by the thing. It's
you have to. It's kind of like a real. Okay, so a lawyer friend of mine once also said, I had somebody reach out to me because I had a company called LA Reel House. There was LA Reels.
Yeah,
they threatened to sue because it was too close, and then I spoke to my lawyer, and he was like, well, that's fine and all, and you guys can go through these conversations with each other and all that, but once it goes somewhere, they're gonna have to prove damages. So
What are the
what
damages?
are the damages? So I guess what you're saying too is if somebody on the street in the background says, I'm in that movie and you didn't have the right to, how did it affect your life in a negative way? Like, and then
what are the damages? So I mean, yes, you have to be careful, but
then distributors are finicky, no? Or did
distributors generally, by the time, I mean, usually somebody has to take the responsibility, and it won't be the distributor.
Yeah,
they'll say, I mean,
so they make you sign a waiver.
You'll have to sign a waiver if anybody sues you. They're coming to you.
Okay,
they're not coming to us. That's kind of.
I just
what
thought
happens.
They would rather just say, okay, well, we'll just not touch this.
No. No. Believe me, I guarantee you, in many movies that happens. I'll give you an example of the opposite. I was working as an AD on a movie called Next Stop Greenwich Village in New York City. And I was a PA on the movie. I was way back in the time that Paul Mazursky was shooting. We were shooting with a long lens up on Broadway and old people sitting on benches and really close focus on them. And we got back to the studio. I'll never forget this because I was learning. I was just hanging out, and the production manager was a bit of a rogue, and he at the end of the day he'd go back to his hotel room and he'd sign release forms with different handwritings, and they said, and so when the studio said, did these people sign? Yeah, sure. And he'd give them all the releases, and it was a total lie.
Yeah.
And this was for 20th Century Fox.
Yeah.
Luckily, nobody ever, as far as I know, nobody ever sued. Nobody ever said anything. Most of these people were in their 80s and 90s, and they were sitting on benches. They may never have even seen the movie, but it was a whole sequence of, getting the feeling of what older people in uptown New York looked like. And he didn't have anybody that was real. I mean, we didn't get releases from anybody. You know? I mean, I'm not suggesting that that's a good idea.
Well, I feel like
those of you who are out there who are making movies, I want to tell you, I'm against it, but it is something that happens,
There is a rule about anything for the movie. No, I'm kidding. With a certain line, I guess. But
there is.
I mean, you're right. Like, I think people feel like as soon as filmmaking hits a certain level of professionalism, that somehow all these little tricks and fudges to get something done sort of just become magically solvable. But it's not the case.
No, it's not the case. It's not the case, and you do have to be careful. And there are very strong E&O lawyers who will look at your film and say, did you get a release here?
Right.
Do you have a release on that product, for example, if you're showing a product in the background? And even if the product, clearly, if the product, if you're denigrating the product by putting it in a terrible neighborhood, there could be real damages. So you got to be very.
You got to watch out with company logos. You got to watch out with things like that, because these are also powerful companies with a lot of money and big legal representation that they're just simply going to price you out immediately.
Well, there's a scene in Paraiso Travel where you see our protagonist, and he's with a friend of his, and they're sitting on a rooftop, and there's a big sign behind them. It's a whiskey ad that's behind them, and what we did was a miniature. Actually, the sign was a miniature, and we created the brand.
Oh, okay.
So it was a miniature, but it looks.
Was it to put in front of another billboard that was actually there?
No. There was no billboard. There was nothing there. We just put a tiny. We used a small billboard and made it. By the magic of movies, it looks like a huge billboard, and you never would know that it wasn't. And
what I meant was, I thought maybe there was a real billboard further back.
No,
and you kind of set it here to cover it up.
I understand, but we weren't. Look,
you just wanted
the period was now. We weren't trying to hide anything, and we weren't. There was no billboard.
Right.
We put a billboard up there that was not really there, and that was a visual effect,
right?
In a sense.
But you know what? Nowadays,
and we had to create the brand. Is what I'm saying. The big thing was, if there had been a real sign up there with a real brand, we would have had permission for it. So we had to create our own.
And then you might have to pay.
Of course.
Or if for some reason the brand believes that this is good,
they love this
advertising, they might pay you a little bit.
That's
right?
Right. That's right.
But I guess
You'd have to.
Alcohol was quite a theme in the movie.
Yeah.
Obviously, it
Yeah.
affected some of these guys' lives pretty heavily.
Mhm.
But also, I was going to mention, we were talking about AI earlier. We've been playing with a lot of AI tools, and for low budget indie films and stuff right now, it's actually quite remarkable that Photoshop and it's coming to video pretty quickly now. All you have to do anymore. So let's say you're on the street, there's a big golden arches McDonald's back there, and you're like, shit, we can't.
Yeah,
That's McDonald's. We're not going to risk that one, right? You literally click on it and it takes it away.
Do you have to just draw around it? Or
No, you just click on it. It highlights it. Is this what you want?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Or you marquee the area.
Yeah.
And you say, replace McDonald's sign with,
yes,
a logo of a cat. Bloop.
And it's that.
It just does it.
It's extraordinary because I come from the days when everything like that had to be thought out and done, and rotoscoped and all of the
physically
things,
built sometimes, right? You're removing signs and replacing them and building miniatures.
No, it's amazing what you can do now. I'm blown away by the ability to replace things in scenes, even very inexpensively, actually.
It's interesting that you're talking about the whole like stealing shots thing because, I did it on my documentary, and I think so if anybody out there is, because it's like, do as we say, not as we do, right? But we all know each other as filmmakers, and so you also know that somebody out there is going to try it, right? But have a reason, because like, for instance, I had this documentary I did in 2014. I shot it in 2017. It came out about this Jewish neo-Nazi skinhead, but it's a documentary, right? And it kind of all just unfolded as it went. I had an opportunity to go. It was time sensitive. Right. We're raising money on the flight as we're going, and we don't know what this is going to be, but I know I got to capture this, and then we'll figure out what the movie is. I don't recommend making films that way because you'll spend 4 years in post and fly back 3 times to get more interviews, but we got it done. The biggest thing was, the whole point of the thing was a former skinhead in this guy's gang, John Daly, and John, who was the guy who was a neo-Nazi skinhead officer, and then his group found out that he was Jewish, and they tried to kill him, and he fled to Israel. He turned them all in, sparked the Hate Crimes Act in Florida.
Oh, wow.
Flew out to...
This is a true story.
It's a true story.
Okay.
Real thing.
Wow.
And a real guy. And I know the guy because he lived in my neighborhood, and that's how this whole thing happened. And so he called me one day and said, hey, there's a guy from my past has hit me up, found me somehow, and said he wants to meet me in Europe to go to camps, concentration camps, to kind of make amends for the past, learn about what we were spewing, right? And he said, but there's a slight chance it's a setup because all these guys are coming out of jail or prison right now, and I might just be lynched. Yeah. So where are you guys meeting? It's like, well, we're going to start in...
He wanted you to film this?
Yeah. So he said, we're going to meet in Hungary first. And I'm like, do you know the amount of neo-Nazis in Hungary? Like Eastern Europe in general, there's a lot of them. So red flag number one. So I said, I can't, with all my training, I can't save you from a gang of 20 dudes, but I'll make sure the story gets out while they lynch you. So deal. Anyway, long story short, because I don't want to digress from the story. It was real. We went through first Terezínstadt, and then we were like, we got to make the trek to Poland. We're close enough. We got to go to Auschwitz, right? We got to go to the big one. And so we're like, okay. And I had my field producer just kind of try to negotiate and call them up. And they just said, no way, you're not filming in here. It's not happening. So and then I'm like, fuck you, man.
Yeah, I'm going to steal
Seriously. You're going to tell me I can't tell this story in there? Like, who are you?
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? And I know that Spielberg went through the same thing on a much different circumstance with Schindler's List. And they ended up building the camp separately because they didn't want to let him film there. So I was like, if Spielberg couldn't get the permits, I'm not going to get the permits. So we put it all in backpacks, all our sound gear, and just kind of walked around. It's like, our stills okay? Just little cameras. Pictures. We took these little cameras with us. And we're just like pretending like we're taking pictures the whole time and filming all this stuff. But I figured if the movie comes out, if they make a stink, let there be a lawsuit. It's going to boost the film.
No, without a doubt. I mean, look, there's a new movie. Jesse Eisenberg does a movie where he and his cousin go back to look at their own family history in Poland, and they wind up going to I don't know if is it Auschwitz? I guess it is. And they go through it, and I mean, it's all it's a whole tour actually, and they're with the tour, and the tour takes them through, and it's obviously all shot at. I mean, it looks. I can't believe at the level of that this movie was made at that they couldn't have built it, so they had to have gone to the real place. And you saw a room full of hair, a room full of glasses and shoes, and those kind of things, which we've seen in Holocaust movies, not in Holocaust movies, Holocaust museums
and stuff. Yeah.
So it was, I mean, I wondered about that because somebody had obviously gotten permission. I mean, they're not saying anything. I can't imagine what you would be using the camp for in terms of this script that would be something that would hurt.
That's what I thought.
The feeling about it.
I don't know what the deal was. They weren't willing to say it, so I said, "Well, then I'm just going to shoot it."
Anyway.
So whatever.
Yeah. I mean, and I agree with you. Let them sue you. It only enhances the whole idea of what they're doing. Why wouldn't? I mean, the idea is to let everybody in the world know about what happened.
And
not hide what happened.
You know what the interesting thing is, and then we got to get back to Paraiso. But speaking of Paraiso, right? The surrounding real estate is all kind of bought up by neo-Nazis and stuff because they like waking up in the morning and seeing the final solution.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, I don't
know. It's a pretty crazy place to go. This big contradiction.
Well, there's been a number of movies. Obviously, the movie that was done last year about the commandant who had a house right next with his children, just one fence away from the camp, right on the other side of the wall, people were being killed.
It's like the guys who live right next to the, gates of Warner Brothers, right? It's just like right by your work, It's crazy. But that was a real thing in history. So it is what it is. And anybody who hasn't been, it's worth the once in a lifetime to just go.
I would definitely do that. Yeah. But anyway, getting back to Paraiso, I would say this was a movie that was a huge success in Colombia. It was the biggest.
That's what I was going to ask, because it has a lot of ratings on IMDb.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like a small movie where maybe you'd have.
No, it did very, very well. But again, you got to remember, the movie came out. It was the financial crash of 2008, and it was about. I mean, that timing.
So domestically, it didn't.
Domestically, didn't do badly, but it didn't do very well. It never got a huge release, but it's been seen on. I mean, you can get it on.
But it was theatrical here for a while. Just limited.
No, it was theatrical, limited theatrical, and then it's been on streaming for a long time. It's been since then, and
now
it's interesting because. What we learned was, I mean, we knew it. We kind of knew it going in, but that there is not one overall Latino audience.
Right.
There's a Mexican audience. There's a Spanish audience. There's a Colombian audience. There's an Argentine audience. They're not the same, and they don't all go see the same movies.
Yeah.
This was an immigration story. That's limited of a limited appeal to. Say Argentina, or Spain. It didn't have the same value or effect.
But at the same time, it connects.
But it does
countries
connect.
that do have that issue.
Now it does even more. But I mean, if the movie was coming out now, I could see ways to promote it in ways that we didn't have then. We didn't even think about then. Nevertheless, I mean, the movie. A lot of the people who were involved in the movie have gone on to do a lot of work, and it was. It was definitely successful. It was just not a big, U.S. hit.
But I think you're right. Now it's timely, and it appeals also, I believe, to, it's kind of the type of movie because it's not preaching and it's not a careful you choosing words. I want to say sob story, but I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I just it's not like a victim story in that sense. We talked about that in the beginning. But the point is that it's relatable also to people in, white people, Jewish people, whatever, that live in communities, Italians or whatever, that just kind of, know immigrants and deal with illegal workers. And so I think it's a little bit more relatable because everybody can, to a degree, I think, say that they've sort of interacted with that in one way or another, or heard a story or know somebody to the point where,
it was also, I mean, it was interesting to me because the main protagonists were not, they were not destitute,
like you said,
the deplorables or even
class,
the people that Trump talks about, the way he talks about Mexican immigrants coming across the border and they're all thieves and killers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
These are middle-class kids who just want to think the life in the U.S. may be really great for different reasons. Yeah. He doesn't even care. That's not the reason he went. He went because he wanted to be with this girl, and she went because she could see the glitter of.
She could see the glitter, and then I was going to ask. It turns out later the whole mother thing, like she ends up going to Atlanta, and he finds her there, and
yep.
I was wondering, like, is that part of her motivation from the get-go, or does she later find out that her mom's in Atlanta and she needs to go find her or something? Because I don't know that was ever talked about.
No, I mean, I think, and again, this is all backstory. It's not necessarily part of the movie, but the sense is that I don't think she knew how she was going to wind up and what was going to happen to her. But, I think she may have had higher aspirations for what her life would be like, but she was on a path to do whatever it took.
Yeah.
So that kind of
she ends up where she ends up.
She ends up. We're not talking much about the details because all of that's the movie that you should see. But it's Paraiso Travel.
That being said, the one thing I will say that I guess it wasn't a story. It was more of a casting choice that made me wasn't a bad choice. It was just, I think her mother in the end and the lady who kind of gets all over him in that kind of hostel thing, not the first one, but where he starts living with sort of the drug addicts. And you remember, like, there's a crazy lady who kind of jumps on him on his bed in the middle of the night.
Oh, yes,
right?
And that hospital thing.
She looks very similar to the actress who plays his love interest's mother towards the end. And so when she opens the door and you haven't seen that crazy lady for a while, it really kind of threw me off for a second because I had to.
Interesting.
Like, is that because she's the same?
That was intentional.
I don't think so either. But it just so happens to be that the mother's also kind of an alcoholic and a streetwalker and all that. So she does the same things. Also drinking, she acts kind of crazy. She's all over this guy. So the characteristics were very similar. The hair was kind of similar. The teeth were similar. So it really took a lot for me to realize that it wasn't the same person. And then I thought, wait, is there some twist that I didn't see coming? Immediately it resolved itself, right? Because the story continues. But that was, if I could point anything out about the film, that would really be the only thing.
I'll have to look at it again and look at that and see, because I think that is probably just a coincidence. I mean, I don't think it was intentional.
Yeah.
That it was just a place where he was staying, because he needed a place to stay, and the guy put him up in that horrible place, and
there's just this one
crazy
lady who kind of sets the tone for the place, right? That's all it is. But I think, and as a filmmaker, I would gloss over that in a second. I wouldn't think twice about it because it's a different part of the film. Time goes by and it's a different city. So why would the audience even think that that's the same lady?
Yeah.
But they look so similar and behave so similarly that I thought maybe there's something coming that I didn't know. And she sort of tricked him, and it's that girl again. And
interesting.
Anyway,
interesting.
But that's maybe just my mind, because I have a hard time just getting into a story and watching it for that. I sometimes have to kind of dissect everything.
Mm-hmm. Well, the funny thing about the woman who played the mother in the movie, and she's caring for the baby of this girl, her daughter, who's out on the street, is she looked pretty much like a used hag kind of a woman. She happened to be, she was I think like Miss Columbia or something.
Oh, really?
She is really beautiful.
You can tell underneath.
She is really an amazing looking woman.
Yeah.
And it was a performance, believe me, because that's not at all what she looks like.
But I also like that choice then of taking somebody beautiful and kind of,
Yeah,
wrinkling
she
her up
is-
and making her hard to look at
She's
because
a well-known actress and very, very attractive, very beautiful.
kind of makes a statement for the path that the girl's on then, right?
Yeah.
To see how something beautiful can just turn into that because of the choices and the narcissism and all that,
Mhm.
you know. It's interesting. The other thing too,
Yes.
2 questions. One, the old guy, well, one's not a question. This is not a question. It's more of a thing, statement. There's an old guy with a beard walking around in the halls of the squatting place where he lives with John Leguizamo.
Yeah.
There's a guy, you know the guy I'm talking about? He's
I
like,
do.
yeah. I know he's not, but I have to ask because for a second I looked beyond the beard and the eyes. I was like, that kind of looked like Mandy Patinkin, but
No.
it's not him, right?
No.
It was like he wouldn't do that just
No.
for fun. Like he,
No,
you know,
it
he
wasn't.
called
No.
him in or something, right? Hey, you want to
I
be?
wish. Yeah, no.
It's like
no.
uncredited, you know.
No.
Okay, because just for a second, it's in his eyes. I'm like, he's
Yeah.
got those.
And remember, we did. I mean, all of that was done in Colombia.
Oh,
we didn't
that
do
too.
in the
Yeah, of
States.
course. You
We
just
shot
said
all that
Yeah,
in
so
Colombia.
of
So
course
we,
not
no, we
then.
certainly wouldn't have brought Mandy Patinkin
Yeah,
down for
yeah.
a-
Certainly, he would have
a
taken half your
moment.
budget.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the other question, I guess maybe I missed it, but I think he mentions it, but it didn't register that noise upstairs that then stops and they have to run. Alls? What is that?
No. It was like a squash court. I mean, there were courts.
Oh, balls! Like they're
Yes,
playing.
they were playing a game.
Oh,
It was a
it's like
squash court. It was like, and he'd always had. He was right in that gym. You know, there's a gym and a squash court right there where he was
Oh,
living,
yes.
and you could
Well,
hear
that
the
makes-
ball, the popping of the ball against the wall. You know, it was like
yeah.
racquetball or
Yeah,
something. You know,
no,
indoor racquetball.
Of course,
yeah, kind of a thing.
of course.
That was
Okay.
the sound. Yeah.
Yeah, because I heard the word
Yeah.
balls, and this is right when he's being all
Yeah.
perverted and stuff,
Yeah.
and I thought,
No. It was just
I don't
about racquetball. Yeah.
racquetball. Okay, and
Those
so
are the
then
noises.
that thing where they all clear out, that's just kind of, they don't go into that in this story. I didn't miss anything there.
No.
That's just kind of what happens in,
Yeah.
in the hood, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
When they get. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, another surprising one, man. I gotta say though, it moves. It does all the things it should, right?
Mm-hmm.
It moves along. It has a great protagonist that you kind of towards the end, you don't like him as much, but then there's this moment of closure and maturity right at the end.
Yeah, that recognition right at the end when he kind of, because he's been after something this
Yeah.
whole movie, and then he kind of
It's
is
like
a
he
dick,
became a man right
and
there.
then he becomes a man.
Yeah,
he kind
he
of
just-
realizes that, and it validates what he's been learning from this other girl, and the fact that, okay, maybe he could stay here, and maybe he could really have a life, and not the life he thought he was going to have
yeah.
with this imaginary life with this other girl, but
Yeah.
a real life, you
Yeah.
know, and that's kind of the way it kind of
And then
winds
you
up.
tie back and they plant these little seeds with the guy, oh, you got to marry an American.
Yeah.
And initially it sounds like, okay, now he's going to go down this like another superficial path.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's good. Really. Is there anything else that you want to say about it?
No, I enjoyed the process again. You know, I always liked the process of working on movies. This one was pretty interesting because it was, I mean, we shot in New York, but with a skeleton crew, and it was nothing like shooting in New York normally. You know, it was but we found this one this restaurant, and that on a corner.
So that was a real
And
restaurant.
that was a real place, and we dressed that place and made that place and worked there, and shooting on that block where you're not a typical movie company where there are trailers all over and everything else was kind of interesting because people they didn't know exactly what it was.
Yeah.
They thought maybe, I mean, what was going on. They didn't know. When these guys were out on the street, sometimes the camera was inside the restaurant so that
It's like, what are these guys doing?
you know, they would just go out on the street and do what they did, and people would just walk by and they just thought it was part of
here
life.
you're kind of
Yeah.
used to it, but I can imagine in some
No,
neighborhood in
in-
Brooklyn
yeah.
or something, or Queens.
Queens, yeah.
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 So it's kind of a little bit, you did a little bit of that in chapter and verse, right? Which
little
one
bit.
would you say was more bootstrapped or more guerrilla?
Well, I mean, chapter and verse was really much more bootstrapped.
Yeah.
I mean, in a bigger way, because the whole movie had to be done that way.
You
Whereas,
didn't have nearly that budget even,
Yeah,
and
no,
it was all
yeah.
shot in the U.S.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, and we had, Paraiso was not expensive by American standards, but it was pretty expensive. It was not
Everyone
a cheap
got paid.
movie in Colombia. Everybody got paid, and we
Yeah.
used real locations and had real, the trucks and the logs and all of the things that we had to build and create were real. I mean, that wasn't stuff we found. That was stuff we had to
course.
make, and make happen. So
They hollowed out a bunch of
Yeah.
trees and
yeah, they had all of that was done by our art department, to make that happen. I mean, they actually got.
what?
I mean,
Did you see how they did? Like what?
Well,
what's the
because we
process
knew
for
we knew
digging
that
up?
that was oddly enough
How they did it?
the way you see people hiding. There were anything you can imagine. There have been ways for illegals to get into this country.
Yeah, I've heard about people in gas tanks.
Yeah, I mean, and
all
everything. I
kinds
mean,
of
it's
crap.
so.
Crazy.
This was just one way,
Yeah.
But I mean, a pretty horrible way actually. But
Yeah.
when you think about it, but yeah,
Anything
that
to
was
get
the story.
anything to get to paradise.
Anything to get to paradise, exactly, and that's what it was. It was all about going to
Jeez.
paradise,
I love movies that after you watch them, you just got to think for a while.
Well, you see connections. I mean, and
Yeah.
the thing is,
Yeah.
that's what happens when you're dealing with really good literature too, because
Yeah.
the book, all of those connections, many of them come from the story that underlies the movie, so that the things that tie the beginning into the end, all of that, a lot of it comes from the book. The book is really very good, and I enjoyed the whole process of it.
It's you were the right producer. How did you mention how did they actually connect with you? How did they find you?
Well, I met
Or how did
them. I met one of the guys who was trying to put it together. I met in California, and he was looking for help, and he needed
But
money, and
just
and it
happenstance
just
or at a
happened.
film market or
No,
what?
I'm
Do you remember?
trying to remember. I don't know exactly how we
Yeah.
got together initially, but the fact that I spoke Spanish and that I'd
I was
lived
going
in
to say,
Colombia.
it just feels like a bit of a divine intervention, like
Well,
a
yeah.
universal attraction kind of thing.
Well,
because
it's true. I mean, there were connections that happened. Many of them happened after we met. I realized that some of the people on it had worked with my Colombian cousins. They knew
Oh,
them,
yeah.
so that there was. I mean, Simone Brand went to school with a cousin of mine. I mean, the
Yeah.
director.
Yeah.
So I had no idea at
I
the
love
time
that.
until I found out that they'd gone to the same a kind of a Jewish day school in Colombia, and they
That's
went
great.
there, and so
just
he
kind
knew
of
her.
you just kind of know when something fits,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You just
But
kinda,
it was. I liked the story, and I had read the book beforehand, and I thought that they had a good plan, and I could be helpful to them, and that's how it happened.
and it kind of lives.
And
between,
then we did all of the post here, and I set up in my office we did it on a Final Cut Pro on my
Nice.
we didn't have
Yeah.
that was how
Yeah.
we did all our post.
Yeah.
Right in my office.
Yeah, that's great.
So it was great.
And this was before chapter and verse, right?
This
Or
was
it that?
before
Yeah.
chapter and verse, yes.
I was going to say it kind of lives between Down Came a Blackbird and chapter and verse as
Yeah.
a story too, in a way. And
Yes, that's true.
so it kind of
Interestingly, I hadn't
fits
thought
right in
about
there.
that, but yeah, it certainly did.
yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks.
Well,
Another
good.
good one.
We'll do
All right.
another one. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, man.